you so much.
We're gonna call the meeting to order. And, since we were still missing a couple of directors, we're going to, just alter the agenda slightly. We're gonna put phone election of officers so we've got everybody. Present.
So what we're doing is we're gonna,
Take directors.
we're gonna move directors' updates and concerns and move that right after the consent agenda. We're gonna go ahead and go through the consent agenda.
Let's do a roll call.
Martha Whitmore,
Present.
Kathy Chandler Henry,
Present.
Alan Vandenbroek,
Here.
Doug Monger,
Yeah, I think Mike and I are both, we think we're here, so.
John Ely,
Here.
Kathleen Curry,
Here.
Mark Catlin,
Here.
Mark Rober, Mike Richard,
Mike is here.
Reedy Hazard.
Here.
Don McGinnis,
Here.
Stan Henry,
Here.
Steve Beckley,
Here.
Taylor Haas, Tom Gray.
And again, just for anybody who wasn't aware, the canyons, so we've got a couple of directors in legal who will participate by Zoom. We're waiting for Director Claus to get back to Summit County where she will participate by Zoom. Director Rover appears to be in the parking lot, and so we're just trying to locate Director Gray. We will go now to the consent agenda. If I could have a motion on the consent agenda.
Second.
I'm sorry, who moves?
So it's by Director Hazard, second by Director Henry.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now we're going to go to director reports and concerns. Director.
You know, the snowmobile gate stuff is not, I mean, you gotta look at it. I'm not sure. But, yeah. I mean, it's. You know, wind blowing big drifts and stuff like that. And I'm seeing them terrible. And so there's not much you can do about it, but it's very cognizant. I mean, I saw some fish making travel plans. And, you know, and that's really about it. Down there, it's been quiet. Stuff like that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, in the Ocotogra Valley in Montrose, I think hopes are up. Looks like there's more snow up above us. We're having some fairly low snow. We get some dustings of it, but nothing that's going to run off to help. I think everybody's kind of holding their breath in regards to Colorado River. People are talking about, you know, we're reading the news, we're hearing the radio, and we're hearing it in the coffee shop. Concerned about, oh, what if they come and take the water? And sometimes that's hard to get out in front of when you say, wait a minute, you gotta go through all of us first. Some of them know what that means. But there is concern, but it looks like we're gonna have a fairly decent fall year down in our area. Everybody's wondering, you know, when we'll start farming. You know, farmers like to be farmers. They don't want to sit around worried about it. So if it dries out a little bit, I'm sure some of them we're just kind of in the middle of the winter, trying to figure out where we're headed. So, you know, things are okay. I think that'd be my-
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Second thing I want to bring up is all the discussion on the Colorado River that we're beginning to see pop up around Grand Junction. In fact, I think in our community funding thing, a letter that was requested by the commission, we revised the letter. Because of that particular letter of request, they wanted to be the coordinator for the Colorado River. We're seeing different organizations using this, some of them using this as a platform to push their hidden agenda. That's what I would call a different agenda. And we're also getting, I think we're going to have to be really careful, at least if we're facing that. We're very carefully reviewing these letters that are like they send us a draft to see if we just continue to sign off. Cash, we could well do that. But now, I think there are some groups that you will find one of the key or two river. And so I would caution all of you that the direction of read those letters that we have and standard letter. Put that language in there. Anyway, that's you notice that.
We're just getting some comments from the public, since this is our connection, if you all can try to speak up.
Well, it's just way too we're more interested in seeing what the other topics
In my backyard, I got Douglas Bass, I thought, a couple acres up there, and they have so, and Douglas Bass. We're playing Vegas. Culture, Grand Junction, so that's on culture. But on the White River, I mean, the snowpack is one, but, you know, and we're encouraged to see that, of course. I'm aware the administration did have to send their community coming together. Education, learning that there's shortages in considerable shortages in the law. The river district is part of the public health. Using education to the right river. And the real shortages that they're dealing with in here. So I was encouraged to see the river district well represented there and engaged. There was over 100 people. For our part of the world, that's good. So, we're getting, now that we see the snow on the ground, 2011, I was part of the second highest peak we had on the market. And we're anticipating to see that. If we haven't, we're getting,
Just a minute, we're.
Ready?
Yeah.
And we're starting to do outreach about flooding because we're anticipating some considerable flooding through some of the lower areas in the White River. And that experienced in 2011, and I anticipate higher flows than that this year. So especially if the current climate tends to happen and we get 3 weeks sooner, 4 weeks sooner of runoff. So otherwise, we're just weathering the storm in the White River as well. The ranchers are feeding an awful lot of hay right now. And there's a lot of competition for it because most of the elk that were in Moffett County are now down there along the White River. So, and I don't know if that's any better because Moffett County north of us is hammered pretty hard in that part of the White River Basin too. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Director Hess.
I only wish that we had all that snow, but you know, we had, every time it would snow, we would get 3 to 5 inches, which was great. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't happening again. And the high peaks are, you can see bare spots from 30 miles, which is pretty scary, but I think there's quite a bit of snowpack in the trees between where I live and those high peaks. And again, mainly because of the trees and, but what we're experiencing is the wind. And so what snow we do have is it's hard and it takes, we had to get a dozer to blade in and out, and we didn't have that much snow. I was pushing the bottom of my car with snow, but it, you know, it got to a point where that wind is, and it's not really hard. It has it at times, but just consistent. So I'm sure that's what's taking a lot of the snow. So if you guys want to share some of the snow, we're glad to take it.
In your truck.
Okay, Director Beckler.
Yes, I am getting tired of shoveling my walks. So we are getting a lot of snow in Garfield County. So
That's good.
one thing I wanted to thank Peter for, we had a Garfield County Water Roundtable that went really well. I'm surprised at how big the attendance was. We had, I don't know, 40, 50 people there. It was well attended, a lot of concerns. I know a lot of ranchers are thinking, I did have a rancher, Liz Chandler, call me, and her comment was, you know, she reads about us wanting to cut back, and she says, we've been cutting back for years. We just don't have the water. So, you know, I'm using half of my allotment and I just don't have it. So we can't give up what we don't have. So that's just something from one of the ranchers.
Director Gray.
So we just, sorry, I'm late. We just giving updates on the weather.
We're doing because the canyon is closed. We have 3 directors that are going to be online, so we're going out of order on the agenda so that we're just waiting. So we're doing off the director's concerns and reports.
Well, I just listening to the reports and yeah, we do have a lot of snow up north. I think that's about to shut off from what the long range forecast looks like. It's very wet. It's a couple feet deep all the way to Vernal, Utah. So there'll be good runoff, good soil moisture, ground's not froze. Up in the high country, there's some builders tell me there's 8 feet. So it's locally, I guess, I haven't had really time to think of my concerns. There's so many, which is the highest one. But as far as water goes, I guess people are calling and saying, what are they gonna do? Take our water? I think that's pretty much says it.
Thank you. Director Gray.
I hadn't thought about my remarks yet either. The usual, there's concern in Gunnison County about Blue Mesa. whether or not we'll recover some of the storage, storage water that was released. I think that the snowpack is really swirly because our drainage is at 140% of average. And the snowpack looks okay on our creek, but if you go over one creek, we have that situation. There's a little bit of snow at lower elevation, which is nice. I think our ground is frozen though. So that there's mixed feelings about the potential for the industry, for the livestock industry this session or this coming season. But I have a little bit different comment. What everybody's talking about in our area is the fact that the wolf is going to get introduced to the Gunnison County, basically. That we're at the center of that. And I think that and the sage grouse, the status of the sage grouse are really what we're here, what people are chatting about there more so than water. Our county commissioners are keeping up though on the supplemental EIS process and on operations mostly because of Blue Mesa. And then we had a Gunnison Basin Roundtable meeting yesterday. That was a good meeting. And we had a pretty tense discussion about the Water Supply Reserve Fund criteria that CWCB is now says they've adopted. And it is different from how we had been funding projects, and it caused an uproar at our roundtable. So I think that we'll have to follow up on that. And then lastly, the Upper Gunnison District is doing a lot of good work. They just finished a wildfire risk study that they're getting input on that I think we really needed to do in our basin to figure out what the highest risk areas are. So lots going on.
Thank you, Director. Director Rober.
I don't have a lot to report on, like everybody else. It looks better than last year, but we've gotten a lot of rain. That one storm and we got 2 inches of rain. Snow is very wet. It's been pretty hard, so I think it will stick around. The ground's wet underneath, so I don't think there will be runoff and everything just taken. Director Curry mentioned bill for our roundtable. I call it a different interpretation of how that money is to be spent. It's pretty concerned. I think we need to let's grade it out there. It's according to them, our round table hasn't been doing it right for a while.
Interesting. All right, thank you.
If we could just pause, we're gonna switch sound systems here because we have one that the mics work, one that the speakers work. Audrey's gonna switch us back so that the directors online can give us their reports.
Perfect.
But when we're on the one where they can talk, they can't actually hear us. So. Sorry. Working through this.
Director McGinnis.
I don't know that we're allowed to ask questions, but I'd be a little more interested in what Kathleen, that roundtable, what the controversy of Henry Keller would be.
I think that is an interesting topic. I'm kind of thinking maybe we can take that up a little bit later, or you could chat even during break. But it is of concern. Ready to go to Director Munger.
Let's see. Audrey will let us know.
There we go.
So good morning, everybody. We're stranded here and Mike and I are stranded. I'll turn the camera over to him in a second, but yeah, everybody's talking about the weather. So yeah, we already have a 3-wire winter. So yeah, I've been plowing snow every day for the last month, and we've had rain, we've had champagne powder and then rain on top of it. And man, Mike and I were just talking. I'd sure hate to be out in the backwoods right now because the avalanche danger's got to be absolutely crazy right now. So anyhow, we're doing good for water. There's a lot of policy issues that are very, very concerning that hopefully we can get to today too, but I don't have a lot to say right now. I'll turn over to Mike here. So.
Thanks, Doug. Grand County's doing good, snowpack wise. Also, the other big thing is Windy Gap Connectivity Channel has started construction. It's currently shut down right now for the winter months. I believe they're planning on starting late March, early April to get that going. Otherwise, very similar to everyone else in terms of snowpack. It's above average right now, and we're certainly enjoying that at the headwaters.
Oh, okay, you guys can't hear me. I can hear, okay. I can't hear you, so, but I get the point. Okay, yeah, thanks for adapting this morning. Sorry, I'm not with Doug and Mike or all of you today. Came home at Wolcott. It's been an interesting morning. But in terms of report outs, like I think others, and I think Director Curry said, you know, it's a tale of two cities. In our county, we've got the southern part of the county is pretty low on snowpack, more towards the north, doing better. So hopefully this all averages out. And then, yeah, I think that just my biggest concern right now is just what does the next 6 months look like? How do policy conversations play out? I think we have our work cut out for us in terms of the fact that the clock is ticking and things are not happening as fast as I think some of us would like to see at the basin level. And so again, anything the River District can do to, you know, be a leader and help others get to solutions, I think is really worth our effort and time right now, because there continues to be a bit of a vacuum in terms of getting to solutions. And you know, when you hear the conversations at the basin level, to hear that some are arguing about the shape of the table and who gets to be there and how many people does each state get to bring, that's not the right conversation to be having, and it's kind of hard to watch. So I'm looking forward to the conversation the next 2 days and hopefully finding some good things to work on in the next few months. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Hawes. Director Chandler.
Wait, hold it, we gotta switch back.
Oh, sorry.
Says we're okay to go.
But he's up there.
Yeah.
Okay, didn't know you were going to be the AV guy today. Huh? Thanks. It's interesting theme here, and same in Eagleward, about 129% of snowpack that is very variable, and those snowtail sites, like Director Winry mentioned, it's, you know, right at the site. That's all you know. So I think that Airborne Snow Observatory that we funded through the CFP is going to be really interesting as we get more and more data from that. Should give us some better intelligence on how the snowpack is looking. We are also really concerned about the governor's proposal on development and looking like he wants to take control away from local governments, especially to push housing that does not have an affordable part of it. We have plenty of housing in Eagle County. It's just not anywhere workers can live. So we'll be watching that closely, and it's certainly related to water. We continue to be concerned about the proposed rail line bringing waxy crude and the hazmat spill in the canyon this morning. The points to why we are so concerned about that, filling up the Lemon Canyon with spills is not something that we can afford to do with our water.
Thank you. Thank you. In Uray County, first of all, I want to thank Raquel and Amy, who just did a really fabulous presentation for the Colorado Bar Association water law session. They did an hour-long presentation on federal funding opportunities and grants program, and as well as our program. And honestly, it was just really, really well done. Thank you very much. It was excellent. And so thank you for that. We're in the same boat. It's hit or miss in Uray County. We've already had avalanches that have closed Red Mountain Pass. So there's a lot of snow up on Red Mountain Pass, but at our house, which is up on Log Hill, so, you know, fairly still high elevation, it's mud and ice. I mean, during the day, it's been warm, so it gets muddy and mucky. And then it freezes at night and it's sheer ice, but we don't have any snow to speak of, just, a wee bit. So, kind of like everybody else, it depends on where you are. But we're still hoping for better later in the season. And so we've now completed director reports and concerns. And we will go back to the beginning of the agenda.
Although we're having trouble, we have received the credentials for most of the incoming directors. We're having some technical issues, oddly enough, opening up one of the counties. So we'd actually ask that we move on to number 3, which is election of board officers.
Perfect.
And before we start this, I just wanted, Audrey, do you want to explain to the three board members who were unable to make it here due to the closure, how they can vote?
Can I say something first?
No.
Which is just that, just for the record, directors continue to serve until they have been reappointed or until they have been replaced. So we won't have any new directors that I'm aware of being appointed. And so every returning director is going to be appointed. So the election will be a valid election. Directors continue to serve.
Although just to clarify, the one county that's chosen not to appoint their director until February 7th is Saguache County. And so Director Hazard continues to serve under what Peter just explained. The other 4 counties, Routt, Moffett, and Pitkin, at least so far, have sent the credentials for the reappointments. We just, unfortunately, we're having trouble opening up Pitkins County's PDF for some reason. So we're just trying to make sure we can open it. I'm sure it will all be fine because their county attorney probably reviewed it.
Actually, you did.
But I believe, Peter, what you're saying is everybody who is in attendance here as a director is entitled to vote in this election. Okay, and so how are we going to do the election with ballots so that the 3 people who are online can also vote in a way that is confidential?
So that I emailed to the 3 directors who are not here a link to a SurveyMonkey anonymous survey for them to vote. And I set up Andy and Peter to receive the results as well as me. And so we should be able to have those.
Perfect.
As long as they can open that email and access that survey. Okay.
Everybody else has a ballot for both president and vice president, paper ballots, anonymous in front of them.
So let's open the floor for nominations for president. Is there a nomination? Yes. Director Chandler Henry has been nominated by Director Beckley. Is there a second? Second by Hazard. Are there any other nominations for president? Then nominations are closed. Having heard no other nominations, nominations are closed. Is there a motion to elect Director Chandler Henry as president since there are no other nominations by acclamation? Thank you. So moved by Director Catlin. Is there a second? Second by Director Winery. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Congratulations.
And I would only ask if Director Richard and Maunder could turn their camera on so that we can see if you're voting, at least physically in those situations. Until we fix the microphone.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your vote of confidence, and I'm really looking forward to jumping in and doing the work this year. Next item on our agenda is election of vice president. Do we have nominations for vice president?
I move to nominate Mr. Cap.
A second?
Second.
Moved by Winry, second by McGinnis, nominating Mark Catlin. Do we have any other nominations? And Taylor, Director Haas.
Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we're gonna have to switch over.
Hang on 1 minute. We'll switch so we can hear
Sorry.
you. I'll give you a thumbs up.
Okay. About now. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. It's kind of weird. I'm like in a silence thing. I can't hear any feedback, so hopefully you all can hear me. First of all, I'm really excited and grateful that we have two amazing directors who are interested in being vice president. I think we're really fortunate in that sense. I would like to nominate Director Curry for vice president as well.
The nominations for vice president are closed. We have a,
Oh, wait, did we switch back? Okay, sorry.
we do have a ballot sheet here to mark your ballot. So write in the name of the director that you select for vice president, and those online.
I think you just need a check mark.
Just
Yeah,
check mark.
check mark. Don't put your name on it, just fill it out. We will have
Thank you.
Stephanie come around and collect the ballots as you complete them. And those online, please use the Survey Monkey link.
Double check.
Thank you.
Hopefully we won't need 15 ballots. That's right. While they're
Survey
counting,
Monkeys are supposed to come in.
while they're counting, do you want to go over the appointment of committees for 2023? And we have a handout that are placed here with the committee assignment.
Yes, so in 2023, just the executive committee has a rotating membership work policy. And so as you see there, we'll have president and vice president from Eagle and whatever county. And then we have Montrose, Mesa, Gunnison, Eagle, and Route. I will only say that may change on whether the director, well, it will change. The director from either Gunnison or Montrose becomes vice president, will be the next county in line that will be on that executive committee. So it'll be Ray and then Sawatch. So those would be the committees, depending on who wins the vice presidency. And then you have all, I think, been given, and I'm hoping filled out the online. Maybe Stephanie can help us with this. Stephanie, with the selection of the counties. We had, or the executive, or I mean, excuse me, the committees. You received everybody's preference previously.
And she did email out.
So the president and vice president will probably visit during lunch and give you your committee assignments after lunch. So the president, vice president have received those selections, but it depends on who was going to be president and vice president before we could, they could decide how to apportion it. Those are appointed by our president, vice president, the other committees other than the executive. Are there questions about that at this point? All right. We are just. Catching color here. They want to go color.
Yeah, sorry.
We're gonna have to send one of these ballots to the Supreme Court. It's got a lack of voter intent evident to the judges. We got it. We're just waiting for the Survey Monkey.
Okay, Chad.
He's lying. Well, he's my brother. So he's lying. But down the west, but he came up there. Good.
And then we all, and Joanne jumped in
Sorry.
I did machine count. Find all of
Trust those people?
Human error of 0.1%.
Yeah.
We hold elections on the round table. Oh, that's always a fiasco.
Really?
It's just, it's 34 people and getting everybody to understand. It's never easy. I think this year was probably about the simplest with the Survey Monkey that they did in the audience. Like they did here. Because you got new hybrids. Plus you got to do it in person.
Yeah, yeah, that's great.
It's always
Yeah, the 69 votes on legislation. Half the people are doing online and only one vote for county. People there. It's always
Depends if you want it. They know it, but it's easy to get around.
Oh, right.
They're not large.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty crazy. Go for it.
Okay, Madam President, the vote for the vice president for 2023 is a vote of 8-7, 8 being in favor of Mr. Catlin, 7 in favor of Ms. Curry. Mr. Catlin, I believe you are now the vice president.
I'll send you.
Well, congratulations, Director Cameron, and thank you, Director.
Before we start, I want to say, one of the things that that vote says is that hopefully you have confidence in both of us.
Yeah.
It also says that we should be united as we go forward. It's not something of a personality mix. It's not something of any of that. This is an opportunity for the River District to make some history. We are going to make history as we go forward in the next couple of years. So, you know, everybody in this room has put their shoulder to the wheel for the last couple of years. We have done some amazing things. Our staff are starting to be the go-to folks in the state of Colorado, which is really a positive for us. You know, I'm proud of the Colorado River District. I'm proud of each and every one of you for what you've done, for being here on this board and being here every day. Take a look. If we can't get here by car, we're zooming in. That says that the commitment's here. It's going to take commitment. It's going to take a lot more hours probably than what we've ever spent. But I think everybody in this room is willing to do that. I'm anxious to get to it. I want to thank each and every one of you for your vote. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I really don't want to sit up there. That's the price you got.
That is the price you pay. You have to sit next to me.
Well, and I want you to know, folks, I came today because Andy always dresses up. So I thought, okay, I'll just go dressed up and he'll think I'm okay. So I get here and he looks more like me than I do.
Director Gray.
Well, I just want to say, you know, I've been on this board a long time and we very seldom have had, we kind of decided we have someone step up. But most of us here have been elected to office. It takes courage to throw your name out. And so I just appreciate that some people were willing to say, hey, I'll put my name in the hat. Because when you do that, you're vulnerable. We all have our own personality, self-confidence. So thanks for putting your name here. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Gray. And before we move on, I think that we need to give a round of applause to past President Marty Whitmore, and thank you so much for your leadership and your counsel, which we will continue to rely on. You've been outstanding. Thank you.
And if Kathy, if I can report on item numbers 2, presentation report of director's credentials. As secretary of the organization, I'm happy to report that we have Moffitt, Pitkin, and Routes credentials, all of which have meet the standard and have been accepted by the secretary of the district. We are awaiting Mesa and Saguache County appointments. We have been confirmed that Director McGinnis was in fact reappointed. And I understand Saguache County doesn't choose to comply with the state statute, so we'll get their appointment sometime in February.
We fill out the affidavit. I don't know why it's not here. So
Yeah,
everything's in order. So
Yeah, it works for us.
All right, well, thanks to the directors for stepping up for another term of what looks to be a busy time. All right, we are now at an adoption resolution for outgoing.
Which we have none of.
We have none, and hopefully we'll continue to have none. Which brings us right to the meat of our meeting, general counsel report. And so I'll turn it over to you. Read it.
It's been an exciting morning so far. I would make a recommendation that the River District convene into executive session pursuant to CRS section 24-6-402 and E to discuss the items listed on agenda agenda tab 7A.
Second. All right, moved by Ely, second by Whitmore, all in favor?
Aye.
And for the record, the substance in executive session will constitute attorney-client communications for which no further recording needs to be made. Thank you, Madam President. During the executive session portion of the River District board discussed with staff and council legal advice and guidance from council and staff on the items listed under tab agenda 7A. I believe there is one action that was action item that was proposed for consideration by the board. Discussed during executive session, and that relates to the River District's conditional water right for the Wolford Mountain Reservoir hydropower project. And I'd ask Jason to pick up and pass.
Sure. The River District has a 600 CFS conditional water right at Wolford Mountain Reservoir for hydropower. And we would recommend the board confirm its intent to maintain the 600 CFS Wolford Mountain Reservoir power plant right, direct staff to take the steps necessary to complete the appropriation in a reasonably expedient and efficient manner consistent with Colorado law. We further recommend that the board direct counsel and staff to file an application seeking a finding of reasonable diligence for the Wolford Mountain Reservoir Power Plant conditional water rate in the amount of 600 CFS. So moved.
Second. All right, moved by Alden Brink, second by Whitmore. All those in favor? Aye. All right, motion passes. Do we have any other action items from?
We do have action items proposed for consideration from the general report. I can take those up now, or if you want to do the public comment section first.
Let's do the public comment and then we'll get into the general report. All right, are there any members of the public here who would like to comment on any items not on the agenda? And we have an esteemed prior director, John Justman. John, would you like to address the board?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Come up here.
Come up a little closer so we can make sure we hear you. Thanks.
I'm a Grand Valley Irrigation Board member. And I'm here representing myself, and we talked about it briefly at our last board meeting, but I don't know, it could be a simple way that when some of your actions are, especially after the big Las Vegas water conference, I don't know if you could give like the irrigation companies, or I don't care if it's just Grand Valley Irrigation for that matter, but I think once in a while we kind of feel like we're in the dark, we don't read the papers, or maybe you can Google it and pull it up and look, but and the board kind of agreed that we would like to be perhaps a little bit more in the loop of what's going on in the water world. And another thing we talked about, I don't know if it's possible, I think you might have went in December to the lower basin on a trip. And we thought that, at least that we would be very interested in sending somebody along. I understand we have to pay our own bill. We're not looking for a free ride from anybody, but we would like to know a little bit, if that happens, I think it'd be very beneficial for our irrigation company to go along, or at least have a representative to go on that type of a trip, or if you take anything. And we have one of the very oldest water rights in the state of Colorado. And we're also very concerned about the asset management people buying up water. I mean, obviously, we have no control over that. And our bylaws say that our waters has to stay within the system, but we all know that eventually water seems to flow to money. And we talked about internally, what could we do to really stop it? And I don't know that there's anything we can really do, because it's our stockholders have their particular share of the water, and we don't have any control over what they do with it. And so that's just one of our thoughts. We would like to, I don't know if you could send us a newsletter. I guess we probably have to reach out to maybe get with Andy and set it on your schedule to come and visit with us of what's maybe happening. And I think our board would be very interested in hearing. And I know myself, I don't get the daily, I don't really take the Daily Sentinel anymore. I'm kind of retired, and sometimes maybe I'm living like a mushroom. I know a lot of things happen, and there's a lot of times, and I always kind of have, my personal feeling is that a lot of the things that are being talked about have all this impact on our local farmers, yet, I don't know, 98% of them have no idea what's going on, and someday the big hammer is going to come down and they're going to say, "What happened, John? What were you doing?" Well, I'm sitting at home like you were, I guess. So I don't know if you could, if there's any thought, if it's even possible to maybe email us an update or whatever it takes, but that's what I'm here for today.
You know, John, I appreciate, thank you for coming back. Appreciate you spending the time. I know our executive session went a little longer than we all
That's okay.
anticipated. So sorry about
We're
that.
not on a tight schedule.
All right, well, that's good. That's one, I would be happy to come down and visit with your board, and or one of our staff members will come down and give you some updates. We're always available for that. We do meet with constituent groups all the time. Happy to do that. I would suggest if Marielle can talk to you, we do have a newsletter and online news service that we send out twice a week. we have about 6,000 people on that email list. And so we'd be happy to add you and the entire GBIC board. And frankly, any of your water users who want to give us their email address, we're happy to send that. I would also say, I'm pretty sure that if I'm willing to come down and meet with you, so is Director McGinnis as your representative. And since he's reading his phone, I can say a lot of things about him right now. Oh, okay.
For the gentleman saying that did go on the tour with us from the water users.
That was Troy Waters.
Troy Waters, so
He wasn't from GBIC.
No, he was with water users.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if he's their official, but so did their director,
Right.
the new lady.
Tina Bergonzini, yeah.
So we had some, and then also I want to compliment you, Andy. We did that last fall. We went down there and invited everybody. And to be honest, we have very low attendance. And then we went over to, that's when we went over to the dedication of the new generator they were putting in. So we're more than happy to do it, but maybe I'll call you so you can get them to come.
Well, it may have been, I'm not sure. I mean, Bill has been here a long time and I don't know, maybe he's not interested, but I know personally that going on that tour that a lot of us, it's a very educational experience. And the other thing I brought up at our board is maybe as the Grand Valley was, maybe we ought to talk to our fellow irrigation companies down there and get together. Maybe, of course, everybody's tired of going to meetings. I'm not so sure that we shouldn't be once a year getting together, twice a year, and what's happening over here with your irrigators and what's happening over there. And, and as we transition from, the Palisade beach goers, they're doing a lot of underground irrigating or micro watering their trees, and how is that really working, and blah, blah, blah. And I think we're sitting back and missing out on a good opportunity to know what our neighbors are doing. What are you hearing? What's happening? And I have no idea. I'm not pretty sure the rest of my board members don't know either. What are you doing? Orchard Mesa Irrigation Company or Palisade Irrigation District and Redlands Water and Power.
Well, we'd be happy to meet with you all. I will say, Amy Moyer and I both just received an invitation from Charlie Gunther to come down and meet with your board. We're working on figuring out which date works best. He gave us a couple. But I do think meeting with a group of the irrigators would make a lot of sense. We're happy to arrange for that. But I will just say our EA team does a great job getting news clippings out as well as our newsletter. Mariella is sitting right behind you, and if you give her your email address, she'll make sure you get that. So
then I know you have your State of the River and at CMU. And last fall, I think somehow Space Cadet just blocked it out on the wrong day. Other than that, that's all I have. Good to be here. I'm glad the moisture, and like Scott could tell you, I prayed for rain a lot of times and snow, and I'm taking credit.
Every meeting, every meeting.
Well, thank you for that. We appreciate it. Quit making it snow in the canyon.
thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? All right,
Anybody online?
no hands raised online. So with that, we will close public comment and move to the general counsel public report.
Well, thank you again, Madam President. I'm going to ask Jason to help out on these as well. And apologies in advance that the order in the general counsel public report of these action items is just a little off from the order in the agenda, but hopefully we can move forward. The first one is a request for River District approval of special counsel rate increases, which is on page 68 of the PDF board packet.
I move staff recommendation.
Second.
Moved by Whitmore, second by Rober. All in favor of the proposed staffing rate increases?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is approved.
Jason, you want to carry on from there?
Sure. I picked up the
application of the city of Aurora in case 1970 CW 3159. Number of the board members will recall that after the West Slope in the Busk Ivanhoe case won the appeal in front of the Colorado Supreme Court, we were remanded back down to the Division II Water Court, where we reached an overall settlement agreement with Aurora on that case. One component of that settlement agreement is that they release or bypass up to 900 acre feet of water into the upper Roaring Fork to assist with low flow conditions on the upper Roaring Fork. Another component of that is when that water gets down to the confluence of the Frying Pan, if there's exchange potential, Aurora would file an application by which they could exchange that water back up for storage in Rudai Reservoir in an if and when under an if and when contract held by Pitkin County. And that water would later be exchanged back up and taken over to the east slope. That's the subject of this application in 19 CW 3159. We filed a statement of opposition to ensure that any proposed decree was consistent with the settlement agreement. And we have reviewed the most recent proposed decree. All the other parties have stipulated out except for us and the CWCB at this point. And we are recommending that the board authorize council to stipulate to a consent decree in the investigation of the city of Aurora in case number 19 CW 3115 in Water Division 5, consistent with the Busk Ivanhoe settlement.
All right, and this is on page 65 of the PDF packet. Questions for Jason? We have a motion.
Staff recommendation.
Second.
Moved by Curry, second by Winery. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you. And the last action item is on page 67 of the PDF, and it's proposed amendment to the River District's financial governance policy regarding emergency expenditures. Your current policy provides your general manager with certain authority for expenditures, but it's not clear in there that in what we do in the case of an emergency situation, where time was of the essence and we didn't have the ability to convene the full board. And so we've made some recommendations for some language that you could include in your financial governance policy that just makes it clear that Andy does have authority, including expenditure authorities in the case of an emergency. That language is in red on page 68 of the PDF.
Just to clarify that authority would be, emergency expenditure authority would be limited to expenditures from the enterprise fund for enterprise assets.
So moved.
A motion by Alden Vandenbrink. We have a
Just
second.
discussion
Let's
before.
get
or
a
after.
a
He
second.
made the motion.
No worries.
Let me get a second and then we will open it for discussion.
Second.
All right, second by Gray.
Well, just real quickly, that'd be very rare. In Mesa County, we had a similar thing, but we did have a requirement in there that you would have, which I assume you do anyway. I can't imagine we wouldn't just immediately call the chairperson of the board an advisement. Mesa County, we had a bridge go out, killed one of our employees and so we had to act, they acted immediately. So I don't think that's a big issue.
My intention certainly would be to convene the board as soon as physically possible, even just by Zoom with proper notices that, but we have infrastructure that could cause
Sure.
emergencies, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to contract and we don't get into a potential situation where a contracting party is saying, well, I don't know that you have authority and I'm not going to agree to mobilize our entire crew here without your authority. So that's all we're aiming at, but and Peter, I don't know if you considered when you drafted this, convening the board shortly thereafter, how we would.
Says the general manager shall report to the board as promptly as possible the details of the emergency and any expenditure made pursuant to this authorization.
But I think a step before that would just be a meeting with the chairperson.
Yeah.
And then the two, you decide, do we really need to bring the board or can we do it in a week or something?
Yeah.
Because that happened to us in Mason County.
We can, yeah, obviously include that as an initial step as well. This is just something that came up in the normal course of, we go through any of our assets, emergency action plan training. And we have a consultant, to convene a consultant, and this was one of the few items that was flagged in that process. Is, hey, you might just clear this up just so you don't have that contracting hang up that Andy mentioned. It's not so much a concern that the board wouldn't give us the authority. You know, you obviously would if we showed there was a concern, a risk to property or life. Obviously, you would. It's more so that the contracting entity doesn't have a hang up about showing you that you can pay for this.
Any other discussion? Right, all those in favor of the motion to approve?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, staff recommendation passes. Anything else from general counsel?
Believe the only thing else in there was the general counsel's goals and objectives for 2023. It did tweak a few of them based on from the past and even updated from the October board review of general counsel's job. But nothing majorly significant. If you have questions about them, feel free to contact me. Happy to discuss it. The board's pleasure.
Great. Thank you. I think we are now to the general manager's report.
Well, thank you. Our Colorado River Basin hydrology report is contained in the memo. I think if any of you are dying for updates, I know DK would love to talk to you.
All afternoon.
All afternoon. But we're trying, because we went over so long on executive session, we have some pretty meaty issues here this afternoon. Not that hydrology is not important, but that we're just trying to manage our time. So DK is available. Please talk to him if you're interested. Don would love to talk to you about our conditions of our reservoirs as well, and the snowpack above them. And so he's online, but feel free to reach out to those guys. I want to, I think just start, going to talk about the interstate issues, Big River issues. The memo, I'm going to assume that the board read my memo that covers the supplemental environmental impact statement in the 7 states discussion. It is an ongoing negotiation, far from being resolved. Got a lot of things in motion there, a lot of expectations from the lower basin about what the upper basin can produce. We are busy explaining what it means to have no water to the lower basin. So we're doing that pretty regularly. I do want to just stop for a minute and back up. In October, I talked about some of the water orders that look like they may have been employed by the lower basin contractors, particularly Metropolitan Water Authority of Southern California, and they may have been modifying their water orders to, if you will, game the system in terms of where they ended up on January 1st. And I will say I had some conversations after that with Met and gone back and looked at their orders. They definitely reduced their orders by 39,000 acre feet at Met between the July and August 24-month study. That reduction was not enough to change the tier or the potential obligation of California. California was not under either of those scenarios under threat of having to produce what they would have under tier 2B of the drought contingency plan tiering. And so I said that that was likely what they were doing and accused them of that at this very meeting. And I just want to say, I too can be wrong. So I was wrong. I apologize to Met. Not that they necessarily care, but I do want you all to know that while they reduced their consumptive use report orders, and their orders seem to be climbing this year potentially. Although I would say, given what's happening in their state water supply system, they may actually be able to reduce their use in Colorado this year, given how much is up in the Sierras. So if you recall, Met in particular can take water either out of the Colorado River or out of their state water project. Their state water project is the water supply comes from the Sierras. Last year, they were limited to less than 5% allocation of their normal allocation on the state water project. This year, their snowpack up there today, it really interesting stats up there. Last I looked at it was well over 220% for this time of year, but it was also 78% of their April 1st peak already. And so they're doing much better this year than they were in the Sierras, and that actually has a potential positive impact on the Colorado River system because Met could choose to take less water out of the Colorado River. But nonetheless, I do want to say that I was incorrect in that. But going back to the 7 state negotiations, those continue. It is the hope of all 7 states that they will come up with a preferred alternative to submit to the Bureau of Reclamation under the current supplemental environmental impacts statement related to the coordinated operations of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. They are shooting for January 31st as a date to reach that agreement. It would take a real eternal optimist to think that all 7 states are going to sign off on something by that date. But nonetheless, that's what the goal is. And those discussions continue today. The Upper Basin System Conservation Program, I outlined that. I think I've sent several confidential memos to you since it's rolled out, but also it's contained in this public memo. The UCRC on mid-December, Accrua announced a request for proposals and said, hey, we have $125 million from the Bureau of Reclamation, and we are interested in purchasing water on a temporary voluntary basis throughout the Upper Basin. And they have 2 tiers that they're offering. One is a straight $150 an acre foot of water. So it's not an acre, it's per acre foot of water produced. And they're offering that. Or if you as a water user think that this is too low of a number, you're welcome to submit a proposal that explains why it's too low for you and your justification, and give them a higher number under which you would conserve water. And the intent there is for the UCRC to contract directly with the water users. After some discussions, our state and our district agreed that any water user who's participating in a program like that should need the approval of both this district and the state. And it's not that we want to interfere with private property rights of water owners. It has more to do with this board's direction previously to staff that we have great concerns about systematic water conservation programs and their disproportionate potential impact on the West Slope. For instance, if water users were to say, hey, $150 an acre foot sounds great, at that number, that rough math is about 833,000 acre feet of water. And that's in the Upper Basin as a whole. If you took 50% of that in the state of Colorado, 400 and 16.5 acre, 1,000 acre feet, potentially off of the West Slope, right? That's a really big number in 1 or 2 years, which is currently that program is only authorized for 1 year. And their RFP that came out on December 14th closes on February 1st. So extremely short time period. because they wanted to get the 2023 irrigation season, so clearly aimed at irrigated lands, agricultural lands. And they rolled that out. And we think from a strategic perspective, a couple things. One, to be real clear about it, that's part of the 5-point plan that the Upper Basin offered. Any implementation of the system conservation or any other element of that 5-point plan, in our opinion, as staff, should be contingent upon the Lower Basin actually reducing its water use substantially by at least 2 million acre feet. And at least as of today, the Lower Basin has not agreed to do that. And so we have the UCRC rolling that out and saying that this is something that they'll get the proposals by February 1st and consider them during the month of February. We have great concerns about that. It doesn't seem the best use of federal money, and it seems potentially very damaging because this is system water, meaning that it doesn't get stored in a Upper Basin reservoir. It doesn't get stored in an account in any of the federally owned reservoirs for the benefit of the Upper Basin. It just goes into the system. And just like all the other water that goes into the system these days, it flushes right through Lake Powell, right into Lake Mead, and right through Hoover Dam down to Arizona and California. And the idea of us drying up more of the West Slope than we've already dried up, given our hydrology, and without any commitment from the Lower Basin is hard for this district to understand. Nonetheless, in anticipation of the Lower Basin actually committing to that substantial conservation, we are now in a position, thanks to our Commissioner Becky Mitchell, to have the privilege of approving these applications, any of those that arise from water that is decreed for diversion and place of use within our district. Meaning anybody who wants to participate in this applies to the UCRC, and they will funnel us the applications and we will review them. That adds a whole lot of extra work to the district staff, but in order to fulfill our obligation to protect West Slope water supply and the communities that depend on it, we thought that was a better situation than having no review by our district. We have, if you will look in I believe you've probably seen this, I put together a proposed policy regarding system conservation program and evaluation. It's at page 154 of your PDF packet. This is a policy that what I'd like today is not for you to approve it. We're not proposing that you look at it for the first time and approve it. But I'm asking that you provide feedback for the elements that are in there. Because of the time frame set up by the UCRC, we're going to have to move pretty quick unless our state decides to halt the process because the Lower Basin hasn't come up with that 2 to 4 million acres. But I think we have to act as a district to be ready to consider applications should that process continue. And that's why I put that policy together. You'll note the first part of it really sets out our statutory authority, our mission statement, our policies that you all have put together that serve as the basis for this policy, right? The legitimate public interest that we have in making sure a program like this is actually handled correctly within our district and within our state. That's the Article 1 of that proposed board policy. Article 2 are findings by this board related specifically to the public interest and the essential public interest that we're trying to accomplish through the policy. I'll be honest, if we're put in a position of receiving applications that we actually deny, we have to recognize that there are people out there who may want to file a lawsuit against this district. It's important to state our authority and our public interest behind these reasonable regulations. That's why it's in there. Maybe I should stop there and say any objection to the statutory sites, the policy sites of yours, our board's policies that I've cited, and or the public interest. Is there anything that I've worded incorrectly in there? Anything that you like revised before we get into the actual implementation? Okay. See anything? I'm sure Peter will have changes for you, but we'll just keep going. And
I've already looked at it, but second time around, yeah.
it's amazing how the second and third and fourth time around, Peter could actually find things that I didn't do right. So it's okay. It's good. It's actually excellent. So then what I laid out is our application evaluation policy. Again, we're asking the board to set the policy. Staff has to implement that then. But what we've said, we take, you'll recognize a lot of this. It is something that comes right out of a conceptual market structure that this board talked about with respect to demand management. While the two programs are different, they come from different statutory authority. One, demand management allows us to actually bank water for the benefit of the upper division states, and system conservation does not. There are an awful lot of overlaps when you start talking about a water market. So we borrowed from that policy and inserted them into this policy, and are looking for your direction. But essentially, subsection 3A, which is on page 157, talks about the interstate structure. Just that we believe that our state of Colorado should not contribute more than 51.75% of the water towards a system conservation pilot project in the upper basin. So just following the division within the entitlements contained within the upper basin compact allocation. And then B is the intra-state Colorado issue, and that is essentially that we don't believe that there should be a disproportionate impact on the water users in our communities within the Colorado River District or the West Slope as a whole, and that we would look for proportionality that follows post-compact water use. And therefore somewhere between a 50-50 split with the Front Range or a 57 Front Range and 43 West Slope in terms of the contribution of water to the system or in this program. This is a one-year program right now, but it's likely that it will stick around. So when I talk about a rolling 3-year average, it's in anticipation of this program sticking around and us being able to average those out. I picked a 3-year rolling average. It's pretty short, really, in the water world. You're more likely to see a 10-year rolling average as you do under the compact. And I think in our demand management market structure, we set a 5-year rolling average. Went with a 3-year rolling average here only because this program is ostensibly potentially short-lived. So maybe it's a little easier to do that. But the bottom line is we want an equitable share of the water to come off the West Slope. And so if, for instance, this board approves, say, 10,000 acre feet in the first year, and no water is produced off the Front Range, this board may not be inclined to approve additional contracts until the West or the Front Range catches up. And that's the idea behind what we're putting in there. The key, though, is that it clearly needs to be a voluntary transaction between the UCRC and the individual water user, and that no water user will be coerced or threatened with eminent domain to participate in a program like this. And we would never approve a contract under which a water user expresses that they're being coerced into this kind of a deal. We have a number of other conditions on there. I guess I could go through them all. I hesitate to do that. You all have seen these before. I'm more interested, hopefully you've read it, if you have questions about what you've read, more importantly, direction to me and other staff and Peter so that we can take it back and incorporate the direction you can give us. I could go through all of this, but I'd really rather hear you talk than me. So if there are, if your desire is to have me walk through it, I'm fine doing that.
Let's see what questions we have first. Got Director Curry.
Thank you. So in the spirit of not walking through it,
Yeah.
I guess I have a couple of questions so that I could give a little input. Have you any idea how many applicants we might be seeing that we'd have to review?
You know, we really don't. And I can tell you, we've been contacted by a handful of folks who are thinking about it. Some individuals and some larger irrigation companies.
So that's a good segue. I was thinking about workload and managing this as a priority. Does the policy, as you have it drafted, lend itself to an entity filing an application for their entire the area under their jurisdiction?
Yeah, I think it's adaptable to that. It would work.
Okay, and then under procedures, when you get to the point where you're, assuming this moves forward, you getting to the point where you develop procedures, maybe we need some kind of an appeal option for an entity that maybe doesn't agree with the decisions of the river district, so they have an opportunity to talk to the staff, and then maybe go to some additional decision point in case, like you mentioned, there could be a lawsuit, but they might not want to jump right into court. They might want to just talk about why.
So my thought was, and this really depends on your direction, is you could delegate to staff the review and approval or denial of these applications, subject to the right of appeal of any applicant who's been denied to appeal to the board. And so it puts the staff in that approval or denial seat, but you guys have, the water users would have the right, individual or group or organizational, to appeal to you. The question is, do you want to approve every one of these? And if you do, I don't want to necessarily take that out of your hands either. I just was trying to be conscious of the fact that you are essentially volunteers on this board, so.
And then I think the procedures need a, notice how I dodged that.
Yeah.
And the procedures need a confidentiality piece to, so that these are individual contracts potentially with private landowners, and they just, and I know we already honor confidentiality when that kind of financial information comes forward, but I guess that's just something to put on the to-do list.
Yeah, and we have thought about that procedurally wise. We are a government agency subject to Cora. So we would, and I would just say the earlier round of SCPP contracts were in fact Cora. And we did not receive a Cora on that. I don't believe the state of Colorado did. And I've talked with the state about it. They did redact all personal information, as we would, personally identifiable information, confidential information, but they're public records, and we'd have some obligation, subject to our council's interpretation, to produce documents. So
Yeah, I think we would be, we're talking about spending public money. We would be leaning towards the disclosure of whoever is participating, the applications themselves, except to redact personal details of something that maybe is not relevant, like, to how much somebody owes.
And it's a really good point. I mean, I think our water users should understand both us and the state are subject to that. So if they don't want their name and information out there that they have applied if that in and of itself is enough of a concern, they should be aware. And I would ask the board to make sure you talk to your water users. We aren't going to broadcast it. We aren't going to publicize it, but if we receive a Cora request, we will honor.
Dr. Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question in regards. So what would you turn one down for?
Well, if they don't meet the criteria that are laid out in here, if it's 100% of an individual's property instead of just 30%. If it's, if it is a larger percentage of one ditch company's property that's under, if someone comes and says, hey, 100% of our landowners want 100% of their land fallow, we can't do that because we don't want to have that negative impact in a specific region of our district. Those are the kind of things Peter has a thought on that.
No, I just wanted to build on that. I think that's accurate, is that you establish the criteria and we would say, this either meets that criteria or it doesn't. The numbers in here, I would say, those are taken from our demand management conceptual document. And like, for example, the 30% number. We've heard from some potential applicants that, it might work better to have 50%. If somebody has, 280 acre parcels, it's easier for them to say, look, can this be 50% because it's easier for me to take my 80 out than to do, 2/3 of my 80 and not the other. And so, those things are up for discussion by the board. All of the criteria is up for discussion by the board. These are just the, potential discussion items.
Along those lines, Peter, I had a conversation with the water users who indicated that they would like those to be 50% of land in case someone has 280s, or I think right now we recommended a maximum of 200 acres, and they said, can you make it 240 because it's divisible by 80s. And that to us would be fine. I just, that's some of the input we're looking for is practicality, how it works on the ground. And so we appreciate that. Does that help?
That helps. The other thing, I just wanted to start the conversation with that is that sometimes my water floats in your water. And if you turn yours away, mine's not going to get to it.
Right. Particularly true in your neck of the woods.
But in my country, that's the way it works.
Yeah, no, that goes to the non-injury component of this that we have in there.
So would I have to come in and say, I think I'm going to be injured by him? Well, how do I get noticed and all those guys?
That's an excellent question. I don't know that I addressed that
I'm not sure that we have a notice provision in there.
I can
That's
add-
another reason that we would, that we would want it. Now, things like some of the larger ditches, I think, are contemplating, adopting their own internal rules that they would provide. So if somebody within the water users, Uncompahgre Valley water users wanted to propose something, maybe the Uncompahgre Valley water users have a bylaw or a policy where, it's got to go out to all the shareholders and they get 30 days to comment or something to that effect.
I think where my concerns are, in a company like that, they probably will figure that out. It's in these private, the McDonald ditch and some of these places where, there's 8 or 10 guys on that ditch. And somebody at the, the middle of it decides, hell, I'm just gonna kind of give it up. And then on past that head gate or on past that delivery, then it struggles harder and harder to get to the tail end. So, and I worry about those people because they're not gonna get that payment.
Right.
But
How
they're
would you
gonna
do
be
it?
shorted. Huh?
So how would you address that?
Well, I think that's one of the things we're trying to do is to talk about, where is it on the ditch? Because if the guy on the tail end of the ditch said, "Well, I'm gonna give it up,"
No problem.
more than likely, but everybody else's water is floating in his before they get delivered. So there's no simple way to do this, I mean, hell, if you're gonna pipe it, we're good.
That raises, and you're right, that is not in here, and I will add the injury and notice to the other water users on the ditch. And I think that's really the injury standard we have to look at is injury to other water users. And it could be on that ditch or on an adjacent property that picks up that water, so.
Director Gray.
So the ditch I'm on, I talked to a couple of my other members and And we would handle it the same way, probably would. We said, we'll have to have a meeting once we see what the criteria is, if this actually is gonna happen. And we'll decide within our own ditch company, based on our bylaws, how we're gonna do it. And I think that's the only way you could. We couldn't expect our guidelines to address every possible situation.
You know, that's one of the things that the federales and nobody has thought about. If they're wanting these in by the 1st of February, how are you gonna, we're not even gonna know it.
We're not, yes, yeah, I hear you.
Director Ely, and then McGinnis.
Are you contemplating a change case? This is a 1 year at the moment cessation of water rights use. Where does water go? It would theoretically stay in the stream and it could be diverted by the next. Theoretically, it'll be just grabbed by whoever's light. Correct. So what's the
So when
point?
it's saying that.
I have that very same question. You ought to ask the UCRC.
Which gets back to if we put it in a reservoir, you'd have water to deliver.
However, if we're not gonna get credit for it, we ever pay something, who cares?
Director McGinnis.
Yeah, well, one thing, first of all, I would, on the language on the appeal, which is a good question, put the board or the board's assignee. Because, I mean, just the logistics of getting the board together to hear an appeal, it's not fair to them. And on top of that, we could get really bogged down on 1 or 2K. Then we got to set up what the rules are for the appeal. And I don't know how we're possible, we have to have this figured out in 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
So how are we going to address March? I mean, and the bulk board's not going to reconvene in the next 2 weeks. So
Well,
how do we do this?
the board hasn't yet directed us to, but we do have a request for you to set bi-monthly legislative calls.
Okay.
So we would use those calls for at least the approval of, a review and approval of the revised policy regulations under it. I think it's a huge lift, Director McGinnis, don't get me wrong. I think that we don't really have a choice if we want to participate and be at the table to make sure that the concerns we have are actually protected and met. And so that's, and I like your board assignee. We might even have, I don't know, a committee of the board handle the appeals, and that way one of our committees could actually do some work.
So the process is going to be, first of all, I think you're right, we got to get into it. But we're going to go through a lot of process pain trying to put it together. And I'm you got to be prepared administratively.
Yeah.
'Cause this,
I agree. I'm a bit astounded by the timeframe that it's.
that was my point. Thank you.
Other questions? Andy, I had a question. When we did the system conservation pilot program before, how much water was involved in that?
Over 4 years, they saved approximately 22,000 acre feet, or they can allegedly conserved about 22,000 acre feet in the entire 4-basin state, and they spent about $8 million. This is 125 million potentially in 1 year.
And looking at potentially 400,000 acre feet in Colorado.
That seems to be the math that is out there.
That kind of puts it in perspective.
It sure does.
Yeah.
It's shocking. That's why you won't hear anybody on the staff refer to this as a pilot program.
Right.
And in addition to which, the earlier pilot program was designed to test out a few things like, would a farmer or rancher accept payment in lieu of irrigating? How would it work and how do you measure conserved consumptive use and all those things? Nothing is being studied in this current iteration of system conservation, of a system conservation program. It is remarkable.
And my second, one other question, these policies, is it a done deal that the River District has control over recommendations on this funding? Does the UCRC have to look at these policies and say, yeah, go for it, or?
No, our state's commissioner assured our district that we have the authority on any application that comes that originates within our district geographic boundaries. The state also is going to review and either approve or reject them. So they too are coming up with a policy. They too are coming up with reviews. You know, we did participate in the earlier system conservation as Senate Bill 19 agency that authorized these under our conservation program, and therefore prevented the participants from getting essentially zeros in their historic consumptive use analysis.
Right.
And so we would anticipate doing that as part of this as well, but that's just a smaller part of this bigger program.
Thanks. Eric Whitmore.
So how are they gonna measure this at Lake Powell?
They're not.
They don't measure it. They, in theory, they will do the same thing that they did in the pilot project, which is estimate and hope. And they think, I think the number was closer to 40,000. I
Okay.
can't remember. It may have been 40,000 acre feet was saved with $8 million. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe that and that's amongst the 4 upper basin states, I believe the majority of that was from Wyoming. And a lot of that was what they called, deficit irrigation, which they stopped irrigating in July. And then it happened to rain for the rest of the summer that year. That's, there was no firm calculation as to whether the water actually made it to Lake Powell or not. It was just estimated based on, some engineering principles. I had a couple of other things. Do you have? Okay. One of the things I was going to say is in response to Director Ely's comment, one of the criteria might be effectiveness. Would this water be would it, and that's a tough one. There's a lot of judgment call in that, but some water is more likely to make it there and do at least some modicum of good than other locations. At the same time, you want there to be a balance and not have all of the water come from one part of the state or the one system in the state that has a higher degree of probability of actually getting water to Lake Powell. But that's something that we could adopt and include in the criteria of is, how effective would that be? I
could see that running headstrong into the geographic.
Exactly. That's my point is that's a balance, but you could adopt it. There's any number of things that you could adopt that are in here or are not in here. And there may be reasons to do them or not. The other thing I wanted to mention is maybe you covered this, Andy, and I just missed it, but was that, in order to support and maintain the West Slopes local agricultural farm operations and the workforce for that, we are suggesting some percentage of the payment would go directly to the lessee. We've heard from some potential applicants that it makes more sense to them to have 100% of the payment go to the operator, the farm operators. That there's terms of art in the farm industry, and the thinking behind that is that there are various agreements between an operator and an owner, and if the operator isn't getting paid enough, the terms of those agreements are probably going to change in the future to ensure that the operator does get paid.
Well, if I can, I want to frame that real quickly. So we recommend in here, and I would really like direction on this, that 40% of the payment goes to the tenant farmer in the situation where the tenant is not the owner, or the operator is not the owner. Some of the water users we talked to said, hey, they want to adopt or ask us to consider adopting the Farm Services Administration definition of farm operator, which basically is the person who operates the farm on a day-to-day basis. And that 100% of the payment goes to that person, because that person is the one whose cooperation that the UCRC needs to actually participate in the fallowing of the land and therefore, and theoretically, at least under a straight tenant obligation, maybe not so much under a crop share situation, is the one who would benefit from the growing of the production off the property. It both achieve, I think, what we want. The Farm Services Administration one actually keeps us a little bit more out of the relationship between the landowner and the tenant, and we just pay the operator, and the operator and the tenant can, or the operator and landowner can deal with each other and figure out how that goes, but we don't pry into their relationship. And so I actually favor that over what I've provided in this policy, but I had written this before we talked to those folks. So would love some direction from you, because I don't know if you're a landowner who leases out your land, you might not like that. So, just think about that situation. I just want to.
Director Grant, Director Whitmore, and then think about Andy's question, if you've got any guidance there.
So you mentioned that if we have approval authority and we deny some, that we might be in litigation or something. So I think it's imperative, and I like the start you have. I have a couple suggestions, which you and I talked about earlier in the week, but and many of us will have some input. But I think it's imperative that we, the board, go piece by piece through the criteria. We make sure we don't have ideology inserted or value systems inserted. It's defensible, so that when the staff or the committee or whoever reviews the applications makes decisions, they have great justification based on what their board has decided for why or why not it's approved. And while I'm not in favor of this program at all, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves as a one board member and get through those criteria and be able to hold up our hand and say, this is the criteria that you would be using. And that's going to take some time. And but it doesn't, as long as you've made it, it's probably as long as it needs to be. It doesn't need, it might could even be condensed so that there's not a whole bunch of things that are open to a lot of interpretation. And we, the board, wouldn't have to do all the various adjustments. We would probably give input, my thought is have a period of time, send it out again and say, get your input. We'll condense that. Areas where there's disagreement, we'll talk about it on a conference or Zoom call in our legislative meetings, and let's get it done as sooner rather than later. That's my. What do you have to have by February 1st? Exactly.
Well, I don't think, let me just say, I think the timing is a little not quite as immediate as that. The applications under the System Conservation Program are due to the UCRC by February 1st. They have hired a contractor to process those applications. They expect that to take at least 2 weeks before they are ready to send those out to the state. The state will then send them to us. So I would think that's going to take at least a week. So we're at least 3 weeks into February before we even get the applications. And then I would think it's going to take our staff, probably depending on it totally depends on the number, right? If we only get 2 applications, we could have them ready in a couple of days. If we get 100, it's probably going to be a couple of weeks, but I don't know. And that's part of the quandary here is this great unknown. So, what I would actually ask this board, I mean, it is the middle of January. I think we have an opportunity, for at least one legislative meeting to take place, and therefore have your input in early February and potential approval. I kind of would love to shoot for that first legislative meeting for your approval, only to be fair to our constituents who may have to supplement their applications to meet your standards, because the UCRC isn't asking for any of the criteria that we're putting out there. So we may have to, get a list of the applicants that are within our district and contact them and say, hey, we need additional information from you before we can consider your application. If you're willing, send it to us. If you're not willing, we can't approve it. But if you're willing, here's what we need from you. And I just would like to have that done you know, early to mid-February rather than waiting till the end of February when it will be really hard on both the applicant and staff.
Director Whitmore and then Director.
I totally agree with Director Gray's comments about the criteria. And I don't think we should be getting involved in the landlord versus the tenant. But I have a more basic question. If we're not measuring this at Lake Powell and the problem that the UCRC is trying to solve is the deficit of water coming in that's going out, how does this solve that?
Well, there is a theory that if we reduce our use anywhere in the upper basin, that it will contribute water to the system and it will actually benefit Lake Powell and eventually Lake Mead. Those of us who are familiar with irrigation and diversion points in the upper basin, certainly in western Colorado, it's kind of hard to understand that logic, given the priority of water rights and the administration. Keep in mind, our state engineer is not going to administer any water that is foregone under an SCP program. So where does it go? I mean, literally the next head gate, right? I mean,
Or the one before.
Or the one before. Yeah, right. Sometimes, you know.
That's why I'm loving this whole thing.
Okay.
We're gonna take a bunch of money, we're gonna give it to somebody who's sitting on a senior water right,
Right.
to fallow up some land. We're gonna make that water available to a junior water right holder who's short on the stream because of whatever hydrologic conditions exist. And he's gonna be able to utilize his land more fully. And with any luck at all, the water never leaves the state. And the demonstration project has shown that no matter how much land we dry up in the West Slope, it will never benefit Lake Powell or Lake Mead. This is perfect.
Yeah, this is why,
You wanted him to talk.
sorry to interrupt, but this is why in all of these discussions, Andy and I have been consistently arguing that if we're gonna spend money, as much as we don't like it, if we're gonna spend money to reduce consumption, it ought to at least go into some sort of demand management pilot project. As much as we hate demand management, we don't like it, but at least with demand management, it's locked in as upper basin water until we need it. But you know, here we are talking about $125 million on system conservation.
Hurrying them again.
Mine's really quick, and maybe I missed it in the memo. If the state and the river district said no to a project, can the UCRC override that?
No.
Okay.
I have a real quick follow-up too. I completely agree with Marty. I've been sitting here trying to think, for example, on the Grand Valley, where they have all these shares. A lot of those shares are leased out. And we're saying, okay, now we're gonna look at every landowner or and share owner and every person that's, whatever arrangement they have with that, and enter those negotiations. I mean, just the communication alone, I think we should just say the owner of the share, it's simple, it's on record. There you are. Do you want to follow it or not?
The owner of the share, not the operator.
Not the operator, the owner of the share, because a lot of those operator shares are leased and may be leased by different parties. So we're going to require a pretty massive communication effort. Plus questions of whether we're interfering with the contract between the operator and the owner of the share. I mean, we ought to just pick one or the other. And frankly, we won't know who those share people are necessarily, but we know who the owners are. So it seemed to me we go to the owner of the share. But I don't
This
know.
company knows who the owners are.
Well, the
We
district,
don't.
we don't know, and that's right, we don't, but
Yeah,
we don't know the tenants, that's for sure.
no.
Operators issue.
I hear you.
I don't know.
Sounds like city people trying to
There
figure out
are,
irrigation.
the reason that we would, recommend the operator over the owner has to do with keeping families who are producing, who are actually in the business of agriculture in the valley, in the Grand Valley, keeping those people whole so that they can participate and come back and grow food. Now, landowners all jump in, leave the tenants aside, push them out. For instance, we understand, I haven't seen them, but we understand WAM's leases allow them to do that, to push a tenant to the side, take all the money and send it to their shareholders. You end up with tenants either leaving the valley because they can no longer make a living, changing jobs, getting a job full-time somewhere else, and therefore falling out of the farm industry. And we lose the capacity to grow food in Western Colorado. And so that's why I'm tending towards arguing that the operator should receive something, right, in this situation. The Farm Services Administration concept, now that's what they do. They pay the operators, not the landowners, and then leave it up to the operators and the landowners to figure it out. But if we pay the shareholders, there are situations in which the operators are just out of luck. And there are local families, there are local producers. That's where.
Well, maybe where it's administered by the app that you just talked about, we can call them and say, okay, how do you handle the
We
communication? How
can't
do you do
pick
that?
on one particular organization. We would never do that. So,
No, I meant whichever farm credit or something. You said
Oh,
that's how they handle. it.
Yeah, they
So
just-
You call them and say, okay, we're not hopefully not the first ones through the forest. I'm just trying to say, okay, how do you do it? Versus expecting this from our board in 4 weeks or 5 weeks might save us a lot of
well, I think
spinning our
the key
wheels.
is to the extent that we get applications that go through the UCRC and back to us
I agree.
that are filled out by a landowner who's not an operator. We say, we can't take the application unless you put it in the name of the operator. We're happy to consider it if you get the operator to apply for it. And that's how simple I think it would be. And they have to prove up that they're the operator.
We've got Director Gray and then Director Wintery.
So I've weighed that back and forth in my mind and I've finally came to the, actually different than what Andy's saying. I now think it should be a split, either 60-40, 50-50, whatever, between the operator and the owner. I think all the way to the operator removes the incentive for the owner to get in. Now he's negotiating with his tenant to see if he's going to get anything.
So how do you handle it? So I don't, doesn't matter to me. I'm just trying to figure out logistically. So now we're gonna look, especially if we have a lot of applicants. We're gonna look at, okay, give us your numbers, show us the books so we can make sure we do the 60-40 split correctly. And then we issue, I guess, 2 checks, or maybe that comes from DC or something. We're picking up, I just think in the back shop of this thing to do the logistics. We ought to think about it, just like the appeal process and there. And I'm not sure that, I think we'd have to make repeat phone calls to get either the tenant or the landlord, one, their farm, 2, to say, okay, we want to see your books, we want to see your numbers, so you have to tell us who owns 60, who owns.
Well, wouldn't you maybe contract with the landowner, but his contract has to include whatever the percentage requirement is to the tenant? And you bring us your stuff. We're not going to start calling around. You want to get this, you bring us your information. It shows how you're going to split it. And that your tenant or tenants has agreed, or else you're not in.
Might be, but if we get much of a volume of this, it's kind of like there's an ad on TV or a 1-minute ad. They're selling something. And the day they open the sales, the little rotating clock's not working. They only sell 1, 2, they're all depressed. And then all of a sudden it starts picking up and they're all cheering. And then all of a sudden it doesn't quit picking up. It's just going and they're broke. I just think of the back shop. I don't know what to do.
There's a lot of things to consider, but that's what comes, in my mind, comes back to these conditions be pretty concise, as simple as we can make them, and keep us out of as much trouble as we can.
Director Wintery.
This is actually, Andy, you mentioned that, the neighboring landowner. How far out is that? I mean, is it directly next, or is it in the same watershed? I mean, 20 miles down the river, that, you don't have to, I mean, just something for you to think about.
Right. No, I think it's, I mean, Stan, the no injury concept as it's enforced in water court in a change case is
That's what I
a
was
really high standard.
That's where I was asking.
Right? And our position on permanent changes of water rights has always been, and we have fought a bunch of legislative proposals on this, that those kind of changes have to go through water court. And we keep being told, no, you need to cut down transaction costs and allow the market to work. And we say those transaction costs are the West Slope's protection in terms of injury, and we need to keep them in place. And so, you know, this is a slightly different situation because it's a year at the moment.
Well, that's why I'm asking, because it may.
Right. So
generally
we don't
those
have
go
the
away.
perfect answer. Remember, this is kind of a triage, like, hey, we're gonna do this for a year, we're gonna learn a whole lot, we're gonna, if it rolls back around, we're gonna have a whole different take on it. a year
So
from now.
then
So-
the second piece of this, since Mr. Jutzman is in the retirement business, and a special interest group wants to rent his farm. Right?
Special interest group.
Some group, person, entity. And I go to him, and this comes back to this payment 60/40 thing. Think about this, then I could actually, if my interest is in the lower basin states, right? And I can actually physically move that water, especially in the lower end, closer to the state lines. Then I can rent his place for an inflated price, but I get some of my money back because of this program. And I still get the benefit because that water may end up down. It actually might. Now, in Miss Director Curry's case, in my case, and people are in the upper piece, if my neighbor takes it, I'm gonna take it. I mean, if they do that, I'm either above them or below them, right? Because first in line, first and right, right? And it goes by my ditch and you put it, that's how that's gonna work. But down there is a different deal. So if I'm a special interest group and I could go to him and rent his water and you divert it and it gets in the right spot, it's gone.
Oh.
And there is a benefit, but then you paid for them to move that water. Somebody has paid them to move that water.
Great, great concern.
All right, Andy, you want to kind of wrap up this policy decision and give us our marching orders?
I've heard and I've written down comments, and I think I've committed some to memory, and Peter's got some as well, hopefully. I would welcome comments from the board, ideally before a week from today. So next Tuesday, read through that, send us any more thoughts. Please don't copy all of your fellow board members because we don't want to have an open meeting violation. Just send them to me and Peter. We will take them, we will put them in a policy. I will send them back out, similar to what we did with the conceptual market structure. If you remember, it was like, here's one concept. Here are the different arguments we heard or the different thoughts. This is our recommendation, but it will be up to you to direct us at the next legislative meeting as to how we go with that. And so welcome your input. Very valuable comments today. I appreciate it. I will admit that no matter what, it will be far from perfect. Okay? But if you're expecting perfect, I apologize right now. Because we don't have the time to do that. We have to be ready to roll this thing. So.
Sorry, just one last question. I didn't see anything in the memos from you and Amy about determination of price. Is that something we get involved in, or is that left for the commission?
Well, so that's a really good question, and I can tell you that a number of the folks who did contact us intend to submit this under not under the $150 price, but under a higher than that per acre foot price. And so you're right. I think we should have that in the criteria, John, in terms of price.
Chair, so what's the consumptive use in Gunnison and in Montrose and out in Grand Junction, all those things? How are you gonna establish consumptive use?
Well,
Let's go 2.5 feet.
believe it or not, the UCRC has an engineer who's gonna.
They know that.
Figure that out for us. Across the upper basin, where all 4 states use different bases for computing consumptive use.
And we're all gonna be using the same now, we're all gonna be different.
Not clear.
Nice. Bound to work, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
And it's $125 million of your taxpayer.
We're on the ground. I'll just go get this.
$125 million infusion into the agricultural.
Yeah.
No, that's a good way of looking. I think you're looking at the right way.
Infusion without inflation.
John's trying to think of how many different open space properties. Your taxpayer. Grandkids taxpayer.
Maybe one.
No.
All right.
Oh, no, never mind.
Go ahead.
I guess I operate a project that has irrigation water rights attached to it, that has a first and a second fill right, equating up to 28,000 acre feet of water.
Get in line.
I mean, I could sell that and actually have that out there, but
Well, it's not, the system conservation program is not limited to agricultural water.
hence what I'm saying.
But is yours consumptive use?
Portion of it would be.
So that'd be part of it.
That's the part. You got to show historic.
Well,
I know this is hard for you because many of you think that everything the federal government has done up to this point makes a whole lot of sense. And this is really challenging.
Yeah.
We're gonna, with your permission then, Madam Chair, move on to the next item, which is demand management. Amy, come on up. So we've alluded to demand management in the prior discussion, but it's really important to remember that, and Peter really hit the nail on the head. Systematic water conservation programs are being bandied about and were part of the Upper Basin's 5-point plan in August. They were around before then, both system conservation and demand management. Both of them ended up in the 5-point plan. In December, the UCRC produced an executive summary that was about 6 pages and a study on demand management that was, I don't know, 63 pages. Those are both in your packet. The Upper Basin states have committed by June to have their states go further in their feasibility study and perhaps make determinations that demand management is in fact feasible. And therefore perhaps roll it out. And the key between system conservation and demand management, both are supposed to be compensated on the individual landowner scenario. Both are supposed to be temporary, on temporary fallowing or temporary cessation of consumptive use. Both are supposed to produce water into the system. The difference is that demand management, if done under the demand management storage agreement, which was part of the 2019 drought contingency plan document signed by all 7 states and the Department of Interior, codified into US law by an act of Congress signed by the president. Demand management allows the Upper Basin to take this intentionally conserved water, quantify it, shepherd it, track it, and store it in one of the initial CRISP units. So that in our state generally means, unless someone can come up with an interstate exchange, which even Peter, as creative as he is, hasn't figured out how to do an interstate exchange yet, would mean either in Blue Mesa or down in Powell. And so that water would be held in those reservoirs until either it's spilled over the top, because it would be the first to spill, or the Upper Colorado River Commission determines that it's necessary to release it for the benefit of compact compliance on behalf of the Upper Basin. And it's only for compact compliance purposes under the demand management storage agreement. For those of you who have been around, which I think includes almost all of you for quite some time, in 2018, when demand management was rolling out and they hadn't yet signed all the agreements, our district, Southwest, and the rest of the state got in quite a tussle, which resulted in the demand management policy by the CWCB, which says from our state's perspective, this water will only be used for compact compliance purposes. And that it will be proportionate in terms of where the water comes from within our state. It didn't define what proportionate meant. Our district argued that proportionate should be based on post-compact depletions by basin. or by east and west, that's not necessarily where the CWCB landed. They were lacked in specificity in that part of their policy. They have a no injury standard in our state's policy. That's about where it sat. The CWCB studied the idea of demand management for a while, went through a lot of iterations with working groups and staff time and public meetings, and there was a lot of process discussions and really some cool graphics produced by the CWCB staff and some neat colorful PowerPoints. And then it got shelved because our state wasn't sure that they want to go forward with demand management, and they felt like maybe the other Upper Basin states weren't ready. Well, the 5-point plan changed that. Our state signed off on that. It said we're going to really study demand management and potentially roll it out. And the idea being that will help with this whole mass balance issue in the Colorado River. So it is possible that in June of this year, that the states in the Upper Basin will vote to initiate some form of demand management program. It will probably take longer than, it obviously won't roll out in the irrigation year 2023, but it possibly could roll out in 2024, more likely 2025. And the question is, you know, especially given the way system conservation, the system conservation program rolled out, is does our district want to be, again, more proactive at the table, helping design, and frankly, this board and staff put a lot of time into a number of studies. You know, I could go through them all, but essentially it resulted in our conceptual market structure, which this board tabled last February only because the CWCB tabled their work. And our thought is, wow, this stuff seems to move so fast. And even I just want to say, for those of you who weren't at CRUA at the UCRC meeting, the 4 states were like, oh yeah, you know, June's soon enough. And the federal commissioner in Castle really kind of blew a gasket about that and said, I can't believe you're waiting until June. We should have another meeting really quickly. We should get this thing moving. The Upper Basin needs to step forward with water. We need to implement this program right away. So she personified the pressure that, not to pick on Ann, but that the federal government is applying to the Upper Basin states to participate in this water conservation. Now, again, no commitment from the Lower Basin to resolve the system loss accounting problem or the overuse down there, but there's this pressure up here. Love to say, hey, we just can sit back and watch this whole thing. We don't have to participate. My concern is that something will trigger between now and June because things change so fast. And there could be someone pressing the gas pedal down full hardcore on demand management. So Amy and I and others at staff have been looking at that saying, how do we actually develop data that either shows demand management does or does not work in different regions of our district? And not to oversimplify it, because you can all correct me as soon as I do this, but we generally have these lower subbasins that have federal projects or large scale irrigation companies that have some pretty sophisticated, comparatively speaking, institutional capacity governance structures, right? And then in the upper basins, we have thousands of individual ditches and individual water rights and ditch companies that may be incorporated, may not, may be run on a handshake between 2 neighbors, or may have worked on a handshake between 2 neighbors till the rich guy moved in and then the lawyers got involved. And you all can identify them, right? There's the difference in the way we operate. There's topography differences, soil type differences, crop differences, return differences, growing season differences. I mean, you name it. It's not just lower basin versus upper basin, but we have these larger projects, whether it's the Maybell Irrigation Company in Yampa or one of our big irrigation companies down in the Grand Valley or the Uncompahgre Valley. We have those folks, and then we have these individual, more individualized operations. So we thought, well, what if we worked with somebody who drove kind of a data, from a data analytics perspective, where we could really get into the weeds and design a program to see if this thing works at all, to see if the water conserved from one place actually gets to a federal reservoir anywhere, to see how many different legal changes would have to occur in order to shepherd that water, how many different scenarios would cause injury to the neighbor, because our state's policy says you're not going to cause injury to the neighbor, right? So how do we know that's going to happen if we don't test this stuff? And so what we're proposing, and I will tell you, you can blame me, please don't blame Amy for any of this. I reached out, or we reached out to Scott Campbell, who designed something on the Bessemer ditch outside of Pueblo, where they looked at a matrix that helped within this one ditch determine where the more productive land was and where it wasn't, and how the owners on that ditch could work together to keep agricultural production at its highest potential capacity while fallowing land, because Pueblo had bought into the ditch at the city of Pueblo, and they had indiscriminately purchased property within the ditch, and they were going to just screw up the operation of the ditch. And so there was this effort to try to reallocate that and make it work. And, you know, after digging around a lot, that the matrix that Scott came up with was probably the best of the worst options out there. It wouldn't work on the west slope necessarily as it was drafted. It was drafted very much for the Bessemer ditch in that particular scenario. But we thought, well, maybe this person and the organization works for could actually help us with data and analytics and figure out how to do that here in a way that would answer some of our questions. And it may, if we run a pilot project, it may show, oh, it can work and it does work, but here are some things that we have to have sideboards for and fix. Or it may show, gee, you're conserving all this water and none of it's making it to a reservoir. And none of it's actually making a difference in the system. And all you've done is take land out of production and you're causing harm to the system. So they're kind of, and it could be some determination in between that certain areas could produce and certain areas couldn't. But how do you do that? And how do we do it without, you know, we all have our opinions, we all have our anecdotal evidence, but how do we actually get some real evidence as to what's going on? And so we've been working with the Freshwater Trust. They're out of Oregon. They're a nonprofit. They have done a whole lot of work for private entities, Idaho Power Company, a number of others who have had water issues, endangered species issues, and they've helped design programs that meet the water flow needs and water conservation needs of those entities. They have not done a lot of work in the state of Colorado, so they don't have all these conflicts. That's who Scott Campbell is now associated with. That's why we ended up talking with them. I wouldn't expect any of you to say they're a perfect fit for our organization, but I would say they're the best we can find. And we on staff don't have the capacity to do this kind of data analytics that they do. They have a lot of machine learning capacity and things that frankly, I'm not sure I fully grasp. Amy does understand it all. But that's where we're headed. And so what we're theoretically proposing, or we are proposing with this board, is that we try to design a pilot, a demand management pilot project that would have a lower basin component somewhere in our district and an upper basin component. And we test out our theories and see whether we're just pie in the sky or whether it actually works or what parts of it do, what parts of it don't. But we're really trying again to be one step ahead of what seems to be an occasionally blunt instrument that seems to be rolled out by others. And so how do we avoid that if we can? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to talk more about the specifics. But
sure, thanks, Andy. So like Andy mentioned, we have been building this relationship with the Freshwater Trust, and they have decades of experience looking at quantified conservation. So essentially using data analytics, using geospatial tools to guide investments for a desired set of outcomes. So in short, this is really using data for smart water management decisions that are based on values that we set and we set in partnership with our local water users. And so as part of this, we have 3 action items for the board to consider to move forward with working with the Freshwater Trust to develop and design pilot project implementation. And so we've been working on a funding model for this using a combination of the River District's general funds and money from the state of Colorado, specifically allocated to the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So we outlined in the memo that as part of ARPA funds and legislation passed last session, House Bill 22-1379, there was $5 million set aside to support technical assistance grants that will enable entities to expand their capacity and expertise in pursuit of federal funding opportunities. And so with this proposal, the timeline that we're looking at, again, like Andy said, part of this is readiness from our own district of there is a lot of federal dollars on the table, as we talked about with the System Conservation Program, 125 million sitting there. There is more behind that. And we do feel behind in developing a data-driven approach for the federal funding that's on the table. And so the 2 federal opportunities that we're looking for test project implementation would be the Upper Basin Drought Contingency Funding. That's 50 million allocated as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then the other piece is the drought response and preparedness funding, 4 billion that was allocated as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we've been working with the Colorado Water Conservation Board as a potential funding partner in this proposal, in that we would spend the first 9 months working with the Freshwater Trust, developing these data analytics, developing these test project site locations from the ditch scale and at the farm field level to recruit pilot projects in the 4th quarter of 2023. So we really don't feel like we have a lot of time to waste. And so as we've put together the funding proposal, we have 3 action items to walk through with the board. And Madam President, I can walk through them all together, and then we can consider whether we take them one at a time or in a block. And then certainly Andy and I can answer any questions and entertain discussion from the board. But again, with the funding proposal, the technical assistance program through the CWCB is a competitive grant program. So we would need to develop an application and submit it to the CWCB. It's a rolling application program where the authority for approval is left with Director Mitchell's authority. So it does have, beyond the contracting with the CWCB and beyond moving forward with approvals, it is a nice vehicle to move forward with this project in an expedited fashion. So the first action item is requesting, subject to review and approval from our council, to allow the River District to submit a grant application requesting $434,190 from the Colorado Water Conservation Board through their technical assistance grant program. The grant program requires a 25% match. So the follow-up action item is requesting the board to authorize an expenditure of $144,730 in the River District's general fund to provide the matching funds needed for that grant program. And then the third action item combines our funding strategy and allowing board authorization to enter into a contract for the Freshwater Trust for $578,920 to support the system conservation and demand management test project design and development. So I can pause there, and certainly Andy and I can answer any questions from the board.
Questions? Director Whitmore.
I would actually move staff recommendation on the 3 action items.
Second.
Second.
All right. Discussion or questions? Director Curry.
Thank you. I just had a question that on the 3rd recommendation, is that contingent on getting the grant award?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we won't sign a contract without one.
Good question. Other comments, questions? Director Vandenberg.
Sorry.
Look like you had your hand up.
Well, I was talking to myself, reading.
I'm a little worried about his answer.
I didn't respond.
You raise your hand to talk to yourself.
I apologize.
Did you pick on yourself?
Funny questions.
Does this, no, actually, does this make sense?
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, this is a great proposal and put together quickly, but I think it really, I mean, it's the flip side of what we just discussed. Jumping into something without any data and without any way to see if it's doing good or not. So it should be a good example for UCR, RC and others. Any other discussion before we vote? All those in favor of the motion to support staff recommendation for these 3 items?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Right, motion passes. Thank you. Amy. Coming
How
at the
long
end
will
of the
this
day,
take?
it's good.
Huh?
How long?
Will this take
Yeah.
the proposal?
No, when and if they get started, the study.
The study is going to take 9 months and we'll be recruiting participants the fourth quarter of this year.
Okay.
Let's do a time check. It's 5 o'clock. We are through A and B on the general manager's report. We did have a couple that are quick items, C and G. Andy, how would you like to have?
Well, I think,
Moving through?
you know, we'd be happy to handle the contract amendment with F&M Architects. You'll note in there, real quickly, we have put our desired remodel on hold. It came in at 50% more than we had sought board authorization in October. We just don't think we can move forward at this time with that. We appreciate the taxpayer dollars too much to jump into something like that. We may end up finding that that's what it costs, but we'd like to take our time and try to value engineer even more what we're doing. So with that, we do want to keep our architect under contract to help us with this. And therefore we are asking for authority to amend our contract by a total of an additional $34,660 for a contract amount not to exceed $80,000.
Move staff recommendation.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes.
I don't think the staffing discussion qualifies as a short one unless you just want to approve the recommendation. I think you're welcome to have a long conversation about that tomorrow. If you want. I don't want to.
Let's hold up on
So-
that for tomorrow.
So I would recommend that we break and meet back here at 8:30 tomorrow morning. I do want to stop. There is an I&O committee meeting at 7:30 tomorrow morning. And
Stephanie has the list of committees.
Stephanie has a list of committees. So those of you who are lucky enough to be on I&O, we will provide a better breakfast and we'll keep that here for I&O committee members and any other board member who wants to participate. You can come in. And so Stephanie, yeah, you want to say who's on the I&O committee?
Alden, Mark Catlin, Scott McGinnis, Reeby, and Taylor Haas.
All right, Taylor, we'll have a Zoom link for you at 7:30. We will not have breakfast for you.
I'll have good breakfast.
All right, and I would like to take up one other item, which is the service anniversary from the general manager's report. Hard as it is to believe, it is Andy's 5th anniversary. To do it this afternoon, so we can all toast you this evening.
Or roast me.
Or roast you. You
Nice.
have a plaque for 5 years of service, and I did want to steal a line from Tom Gray that this is a particular moment in time at the River District. And, you know, the River District has always had strong leadership. It's always had great staff and a good board. But I think you came to us at just the right moment. You're just who we need, and the staff you've assembled is really excellent. I love you. Thank you for that. And thank you for staying with us for the next 5 years.
I just want to say I really appreciate it. And couldn't have a better staff to work with, and it's easy to look good when you have such a great staff. And Well, I think it's been a fast 5 years. I feel like my body's aged. like 100, so.
All right, so.
All right, how many
miles
go?
Stephanie,
Oh, I
if
got
you
it.
want to tell us about dinner, where it is?
Dinner tonight is at Moonlight,
Oh,
Scott's favorite place.
Where's Moon?
It's over there by
It's a block
Summit
from the
Canyon,
hotel.
if you guys
Yeah,
know.
it is like a block from your hotel. You can walk. It is, does it? Summit Canyon Mountaineering, if you know where that currently is located, is right over there. If you Google Moonlight Cafe, the
It says
address
it's in
is
the
on
Come
the,
and Go.
They're right next to the Come and Go.
right next to the Come and Go. Yeah, go to the Come and Go and walk just past it. It's on the left.
Sure.
I thought that was the.
Not the Qdoba, not the Qdoba. So you walk down Sixth Street, heading east on Sixth Street, and you'll hit it.
You can't miss the Come and Go, and they share a wall, so just get there, you're there.
But it's the opposite direction from Qdoba. Qdoba is one direction off the Come and Go.
Oh, it's on
Go
the
the east.
downtown.
All right,
6 o'clock, right?
Engineers built
all right.
Glenwood, so you don't know which way. is-
Oh, that's true.
Thank you, everyone. This is a lot of.